This is BBC News. I'm Rebecca Jones with the latest headlines. It's budget day and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is limbering up to deliver his big speech to the House of Commons. We'll have full live coverage. Around £20 billion of spending's been announced so far, including a rise in the national living wage and an end to the public sector pay freeze. But the government's facing pressure to do more to help with the rising costs of living.
But what about those promises to level up outside of London? Well, we brought the sofa to Burnley today to find out what people want to hear from the Chancellor when he stands up in Parliament a little later.
In other news, a new report says the government's coronavirus test and trace programme in England failed to achieve its main objective of breaking chains of transmission, despite costing an eye-watering amount of money. The Queen withdraws on medical advice from hosting a reception at the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow. And the D-Day veteran Harry Billinge finally visits the memorial in Normandy he helped to fund. Hello and welcome to BBC News. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak will deliver his budget and spending review today. A number of policies have already been announced, but the government is under pressure to do more to help people struggling with the rising cost of living. So far, we've been told there will be a rise in the national living wage from £8.91 per hour to £9.50 and an end to the pay freeze for public sector workers. There'll be £5.9 billion for NHS England to tackle the backlog of people waiting for tests and scans, and £2.6 billion to be spent on creating 30,000 new school places for children with special educational needs and disabilities. In all, the promises already unveiled add up to around £20 billion of extra spending. But we'll have to wait until after midday to hear how the Chancellor plans to fund these policies. And Labour has warned the spending pledges do not go far enough to make up for tax and price hikes. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
Rishi Sunak showing off his footwear and socks in a set of photos released by the Treasury of the Chancellor preparing for today. Chatting through the budget with his advisers, always with an eye to his image. His dog Nova even features, as do his snacks. But by the time we get to this moment later on,
can the country afford this budget, Mr. Sunak?
And him addressing the Commons, what will really matter is what it means for each of us.
But his biggest question for him is how much is he going to have to spend on all of those public services, particularly the ones that have really suffered during the austerity years in a world in which the economy, I'm afraid, is smaller as a result of the pandemic than it would otherwise have been.
A big issue for many right now is the cost of living and whether the government's upbeat language matches how things feel week by week for lots of people.
This is going to be a brutal and a bitter winter for millions of householders who are not going to be able to bear the extra costs of heating their homes because of the price rises. The Chancellor today has got to match his fiscal responsibility with a bit of moral responsibility.
In the last few days, loads of stuff about today's budget has already been announced. NHS England will get £5.9 billion to tackle the backlog of people waiting for tests and scans. £6.9 billion has been allocated to transport projects, including in West Yorkshire, the West Midlands and Greater Manchester. And the minimum pay rate for those aged 23 and over, known as the National Living Wage, will go up to £9.50 an hour from April. But even though plenty has already been announced, what we'll get from the Chancellor later still really matters because it'll be the detail about the state of the economy and the state of the government's finances. And so crucially, where our money will be spent and where it won't. Now then, it's over to the Chancellor and his big moment at lunchtime. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming, is in Downing Street. Adam, good morning to you. So many announcements in advance. I wanted to ask whether you were expecting any surprises, any rabbits to perhaps come out of the hat, because there is talk this morning, isn't there, about perhaps a change to universal credit?
Yeah, well, it would certainly be a tradition for the Chancellor to have a big surprise at the end of the speech, something that people weren't expecting and which gets all the headlines and maybe distracts from any bad news that is contained therein. And there's lots of speculation that it could be something to do with the cost of living. Yesterday, the Treasury was rejecting Labour's idea of reducing the VAT on domestic energy, saying that was poorly targeted and wouldn't help the people that needed it the most. Does that mean that there's another idea being worked on that would perhaps work in a better way from the Treasury's point of view? We'll wait and see. But the thing that will unlock this whole budget is not the budget document or the spending review, which sets out the spending totals for the government departments over the next 3 years. I think it's actually going to be the economic forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent watchdog that works out what could be happening with the economy. The expectation, quite well-informed expectation, is that they're going to find that the permanent effects on the economy of the COVID epidemic are much less than they were predicting, even just a few months ago. Now that means that Rishi Sunak could have more money to splash than he was expecting. He could use that to give more money to government departments who are expecting quite tight budgets over the next few years, or he could save it up as a bit of a rainy day fund, or he could start using it on other things. Lots of MPs waiting to find out if they're going to get a slice of this new levelling up fund, which will send money to projects in people's neighbourhoods and high streets. Will we get to see a down payment on the billions and billions of pounds of investment that will be needed to get to the net zero, the big government climate change target? Or, back to where we started, will there be some extra money there to help the people with their household bills?
Plenty to look out for, as you say, Adam. Can you help me with something that's been puzzling me? The Chancellor has been talking about an economy fit for a new age of optimism. What do you think that means?
Well, there's two things there. All politicians like to talk about the future because they know that's where the next battle is fought, and they know that that's what people are thinking about. That's just kind of classic political tactic to associate yourself with a brighter future and the better life just beyond the horizon. Also, it is a big signal from the Treasury that they think the COVID emergency is over. The virus might not be done with us as a country yet and as a planet, but they think that the phase that we've been through is done. That means an end to the emergency spending and the eye-watering sums that were spent on COVID, but also potentially a return to old-fashioned things like Chancellor saying they need to balance the books. And I bet we'll get some language in the speech today about the fiscal rules, the kind of the rules that Rishi Sunak will try and bind himself as he manages the nation's finances before the next election.
Adam, good to talk to you. That's Adam Fleming, our chief political correspondent in Downing Street. Thanks for now. Let's go to Burnley now and join my colleague Ben Thompson. Very good morning to you, Ben.
Yeah, good morning to you. Welcome to Burnley. We're at Queen Street Mill, just outside the town centre here. This place was built in 1894, and testament to the rich history of this part of the country. East Lancashire on the map for selling cotton right around the world. It brought wealth, prosperity and growth, and it paid a lot of bills in this part of the world. But as manufacturing declined, this town struggled for a purpose. And without manufacturing, it fell into hard times. And so the town, well, it put its faith in Tory promises of levelling up in that last election. But what does levelling up look like somewhere like this? In a moment, I'm going to speak to a couple of guests that I've got down here on the sofa in Queen Street Mill. We'll assess what the Chancellor's budget could mean for people here, but also for our personal finances too. But before that, I've been taking a trip around town and looking at how the Chancellor might make those numbers this afternoon add up. The Chancellor's challenge: claw back the cost of COVID or protect people from the squeeze on living, begin to balance the books or give in to the Prime Minister's urge to splurge on levelling up places like here in Burnley. Some of the big budget numbers are pretty eye-watering. The UK deficit, that's the difference between what the government spends and what it brings in, rose to £320 billion last year. That's the highest level since World War II. The Chancellor's instinct is clear.
Tax rises are unpopular. Some will even say unconservative. I'll tell you what is unconservative. Unfunded pledges, reckless borrowing and soaring debt.
The problem is the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies says the UK's tax burden is set to reach its highest sustained peacetime level, even before today's speech. The new health and social care levy will raise £36 billion. The Treasury will also make more from corporation and income tax. But where else can the Chancellor find some cash? Asking students to repay their loans sooner, higher council tax, alcohol duty or a levy on online retailers, pensions or taxes on inheritance and profits. It's not just cuts in the Chancellor's sights, there's also a pay rise on the way for millions. But can it keep up with the rising cost of living? Inflation is currently at 3.1% and it's forecast to rise even higher. Even though the climate summit may be just around the corner, persistently high prices could force another freeze in petrol duty, and there could be more support for the price we pay for our home energy bills. Government departments that aren't protected, including courts, local governments and prisons, could reportedly see their day-to-day budgets squeezed. Last week, the Chancellor was given a boost. Borrowing for this year is so far lower than forecast, but with the economic recovery still fragile, that won't make today's decisions any easier. So those are the big numbers, but what will it mean for places like this? Let me introduce you to Cozy, who's with us from Burnley Borough Council and also Lancashire County Council, and Laura Suter, personal finance expert. Morning to you both. Nice to see you. Cozy, first of all, explain to me why you're carrying a giant match in your hand.
A few weeks ago, I had the honour of lighting the boilers at Queen Street Mill where we are today, for the first time in 3 years. So it's the start of our rejuvenation of the cultural offer at this mill, which has needed a lot of repair over the years.
And this mill is fascinating because it really speaks of a time when Burnley was leading the way in the world, wasn't it? Selling this cotton right around the world. It brought wealth, it brought prosperity. And the reason we're here today, because of course the Chancellor will stand up. He has promised to level up places like this. What does levelling up mean in Burnley?
Well, I think a cleaner, healthier, more prosperous Burnley and county, and one of the things that we, in levelling up, which is the term they like to use, but I think it really is just a fairness of bringing this back to the north, where we do feel that we have been slightly overlooked in former times, especially in favour of Manchester, Leeds and Liverpool, which I think ought to remember that we are the places that have also fed into their benefit. But yes, so our levelling up will be our town centres, it will be our health offer, better education, better transport, green infrastructure, because that will lead into our health offer. And but also on the county side, we're working with our boroughs towards the same goal.
Yes, of course. We'll talk about some of those goals in just a second. But Laura, you know, quite a wish list there from Cozy about what the Chancellor might be able to offer. Will we get any of it? It feels like we've heard a lot of the announcements already.
Yeah, so I think we've heard quite a lot of the good news announcements, and obviously a couple of months ago we had the big announcement about national insurance, which was kind of a big bad news announcement for people's personal finances. There are definitely some areas that we're still looking for more clarity on. So things like student loans, they're talking about changing the criteria for that and lowering the threshold on that. There's also talk of a big reform of the alcohol taxes and the way that duty is applied to alcohol. And then also more on our personal finances. So I think there could still be some tax hikes. Interestingly, when the Chancellor was interviewed earlier this week, he refused to rule out any further tax hikes. So we could see it on some things like wealth taxes, so capital gains tax, inheritance tax, things like that.
Cozy, I want to talk a little bit as well about Burnley being a place for investment. And, you know, this is my hometown. I grew up here and I've seen it change a lot. And there is investment, there is growth, there are businesses doing great things, but the town has a reputation, doesn't it, that it struggles to shake off. And I wonder, when that starts to change and it becomes a place that people see as a place to hire skilled workers and to invest and to grow. That is the challenge, isn't it?
It is, but we've always been skilled. But I think, and I do have to put some blame on the media here, is that they have certain causes that they like to espouse. We've always been innovative, we've always been imaginative, we've always had people who have started their own businesses and worked jolly hard with them. As a county as well as a borough, we reflect that. And we are battling against a prejudice from the south, to be honest.
And as far as skills are concerned, you know, are people coming out of schools and colleges around here with the skills for the jobs that are available? Because we know the jobs market has changed. It's not about mills and manufacturing, it's about tech and innovation and new business.
But there's still manufacturing here. We still have Ian Mankin down below and John Spencer. They are doing modern textiles for people like the Landmark Trust. But yes, we have British Aerospace. We have modern engineering, Digi-Services. We've just taken, I think there's the Digi-Services, and I know I always get the name of this wrong, but it's just been announced to come to Lancashire itself. So we have a vast, but a wide number of jobs, and but we do need more money into skills to upskill people. I'm very glad that there is going to be a rise in the minimum wage. We still do need to do work on education skills, but that is something that we're concentrating on at the county level, and the boroughs are all working with us on that.
Yeah, and Laura, you talked about national insurance contributions going up, so that a cost for all of us. One of the giveaways we heard yesterday, a rise in the national living wage, so people on the lowest incomes get a bit more cash. But I wonder how far that extra cash goes, given that we know petrol prices are going up, gas prices are going up, food prices are going up. That will just be eaten up, won't it, the new increase?
Yeah, so inflation is the big issue here, and we had expectations that inflation was going to go to about 4% by the end of the year. That was before we saw these massive hikes in energy prices, so we're now expecting it to go a bit higher than that. So that national living wage increase is about a 6.6% increase, but if 5% of that gets swallowed up with inflation and just keeping up with rising costs, then actually the real impact on families is less, isn't it?
Really nice to see you both. Thanks for explaining that, Cozy and Laura. Thank you. Thanks for being with us this morning. So we get many more details from the Chancellor later today. Of course, stands up in Parliament at 12:15. We'll start to get some of those announcements through. But you know, the real challenge is how what is decided in Westminster translates through to places up and down the country, places like here in Burnley that have put faith in those promises to level up. What does levelling up look like on the ground? We will find out later today.
Ben, we will also talk to you later today. Many thanks for now. We're joined by Paul Johnson, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies now. Good morning to you, Paul Johnson. And I'd like to start, if I may, with the big picture. As far as you're concerned, where are we as a nation with regard to the public finances?
Well, obviously we had the biggest level of borrowing ever in peacetime last year, and so debt has increased. We've got a pretty high level of borrowing this year, but borrowing's much lower, significantly lower than expected, because the economy has bounced back quite a lot faster. And looking 2 or 3 years hence, quite remarkably actually, it looks like borrowing will be completely under control and back down to the sorts of levels we might have expected had it not been for the pandemic. So as far as the public finances are concerned, I think the Chancellor's going to be pretty pleased. I think he's going to get some good news today. And he's going to potentially have room for either not introducing some of the huge tax rises he's announced, or having a bit more money to spend on public services.
OK, so that leads me on to the fact that he's already announced, hasn't he, more than £20 billion worth of spending. How is he going to pay for all those pledges? Are you suggesting that could come out of this pot you've just been describing?
Well, I think you need to be very, very careful about saying he's promised £20 billion worth of spending, because I certainly have not a clue what that means, because the sorts of numbers he's been bandying about don't really make any sense. It's unclear whether some of it's new money, it's unclear over what period of time, and so on and so on. All of that said, all of the indications seem to be that because borrowing's looks like it will be lower than otherwise, he's going to spend at least some of that, or give at least some of that as additional spending on public services. Remember, he's already pledged a vast amount of additional money for the National Health Service. That's what the Prime Minister said in September. But other parts of government, the court system, the justice system, prisons, local government, social care, they've been starved of funding for a decade. And it looks like they will start to get a bit of a boost after today.
Cost of living, of course, is a big worry for many people. We were hearing Ben in Burnley there talking about rising petrol prices, rising energy prices. Could there be help there? There is some talk this morning perhaps of a tweak to the rules around universal credit.
Well, on petrol specifically, I'm sure we will have, the 11th or 12th year of no increase in petrol duty, which against inflation is yet another cut. I mean, no doubt welcome as a boost to living standards, but hardly consistent with a government that claims to be concerned about net zero. In terms of benefits or universal credit, yes, there seems to be some well-informed speculation that the taper rate, in other words, the rate at which universal credit is reduced as your income goes up, that will be cut, and that will mean that a lot of people in work will see some increase in the amount of universal credit that they receive. Clearly, it doesn't help people who are out of work because they're not affected by the taper, and so those out of work will still be losing the full £20 a week that was cut back at the beginning of the month.
Paul, just to end where we began, in a sense, with the larger economic picture you painted, is it your view that this is a quick temporary bounce back, or is the economy and the public finances looking stronger in the long term?
Well, so far as we can tell at the moment, it looks like they're looking stronger in the long term. But of course, there are risks, and the big risk that you've alluded to is inflation. Now, everyone is hoping that this is a one-off bounce in prices driven by increased product costs, petrol and fuel, and so on, and supply chain problems. But if that gets into the system, if everyone starts looking for higher wages, which drive higher prices, which drive higher wages and so on, then that's the sort of thing that could cause real problems over the next several years. But I think at the moment, the outlook is not looking too bad. Though remember, not too bad is that's still against a pretty low base. The last decade has seen growth at miserable levels, 1.5% a year, against much higher growth than that prior to 2008. And I suspect the best we can hope from the next decade is another decade of growth, but a rather miserable rate.
Paul Johnson, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. A busy day ahead, I know, for you. For now, though, many thanks for talking to us here on BBC News. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mike Cherry is chair of the Federation of Small Businesses, and he joins us now. Very good morning to you. What are you looking for? What do you want to hear from the Chancellor today? Mike Cherry, we're struggling to hear you. I'm sorry. You've stopped speaking, so I think you might be able to hear me.
Well, despite everything almost being announced, we're still very, very hopeful that as the Chancellor announced the...
Mike Cherry, we're having problems hearing you. We will come back to you. We'll try and sort the technical difficulties out and hope to catch up with you in a few minutes. Might be worth me just checking. Can you hear me? No, we will return to you later. Mike Cherry for now. Bear with us. Many thanks. We will, of course, bring you the budget speech live in a special programme. Later this morning here on BBC News, we'll have pre-budget analysis and all the reaction, and that is from 11:15 this morning. The government's coronavirus test and trace programme in England has failed to achieve its main objective of helping break chains of COVID transmission. Well, that's according to a group of cross-party MPs. The Public Accounts Committee says a number of the programme's aims have been overstated or not achieved despite costing an eye-watering amount of money. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports.
The performance of the Test and Trace programme in England has been under scrutiny for months. This assessment by MPs could hardly be more damning. The Public Accounts Committee, which examines value for money of government projects, says the programme's outcomes have been muddled and it hasn't achieved a number of its main objectives, despite costing the taxpayer millions. The NHS Test and Trace programme has been one of the most expensive health programmes delivered during the pandemic. It's cost £37 billion over 2 years, equal to nearly a fifth of the entire NHS England budget. When it comes to test results, just 14% of 691 million lateral flow tests distributed by Test and Trace were registered. And in periods of pressure, like December 2020, just 17% of people were receiving test results within 24 hours.
We found it very difficult to see what it had achieved for the 37 billion. It set out very bold aims. It failed on many of its own terms. Crucially now, its responsibilities are in the new UK Health Security Agency, but that's still got quite a lot to prove.
The main objective for Test and Trace was to help break chains of COVID-19 transmission and enable people to return towards a more normal way of life. Instead, England experienced 2 more national lockdowns and saw a dramatic rise in case numbers. The use of expensive private sector consultants who were meant to deliver the programme comes in for particular criticism. For all the eye-watering sums of money spent on Test and Trace, MPs say it's far from clear whether it will be a legacy system that's built to last, one that will be ready for the next crisis. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Insulate Britain have blocked a major road in West London. A temporary injunction was granted against the group earlier this week after protesters brought parts of London to a standstill. 14 people have also been arrested in Kent after another major artery road was obstructed in both directions earlier this morning. Greg Mackenzie is at the protest in West London. He joins us now. Greg, what's happening where you are?
Well, good morning. So Insulate Britain arrived here on the A40 in West London at 8 a.m. this morning. We were the first to break that news. Now, many of them have been removed. But if you look around, this is the A40. You'd never be able to walk along here in the middle of the road, in fact, given that this is one of the busiest roads in the capital, leading down to Heathrow Airport. Now, many of the protesters have been arrested. There were a few here, and a few here now are being spoken to by the police. Now, what you find is many of them have glued themselves to the ground, and the police are using some sort of solution to unglue them. And this guy here has glued his feet to the ground. Why have you done this?
I've done this because every single year in the UK, 8,000 pensioners die in their homes because they can't afford central heating. I've done this because millions of families in the UK can't afford their heating bills, and it's only getting worse as the heating prices go up. We are asking the government to insulate all the homes of the United Kingdom. Now, by doing that, obviously you're going to pull millions of people out of fuel poverty, but you're also going to, it's the most cost-effective way to reduce carbon emissions, and you would create hundreds of thousands of jobs. So what we're asking for the government is totally within their power, and it's a no-brainer. They should be doing it today.
People ain't happy, though, that you're doing this. Angry motorists this morning, I've seen them swearing at you. Some almost came into physical altercations. Police are here now having to patrol this and move you. Some will say a waste of police resources, they should be elsewhere. So what do you say to those people that say that you are causing disruptions to normal people trying to get to work?
We are very sympathetic for all of these people who disrupted, but we have to tell them we've tried everything else. There was 10,000 people outside Parliament in August. Nobody's heard about it. There's been petitions to Parliament, letters to MP. It all gets ignored. It's only when you cause disruption that you get interviewed and go on the news. Like 100 people have had a bigger impact than 10,000 people just because we're causing disruption.
All right, thank you very much. Now, you did mention those injunctions earlier. Now, Transport for London were granted an injunction to prevent the protesters from carrying out such actions, and these protesters now will be liable for jail. They will be arrested and they will get their moment in court. But in terms of going forward, Insulate Britain say they will continue these actions until they are listened to.
Greg, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you. Greg Mackenzie at the protest in West London. Protests are also taking place across London, including at Dartford Crossing. Our reporter James Waterhouse is there. What's happening where you are, James?
Well, it's the now familiar scene, isn't it? The police have now arrived with that solution which dissolves glue in large syringes. It feels kind of well rehearsed on both sides. The protesters here, they had one blockage on another. They staged another blockage on a neighbouring roundabout, and then around half an hour later came here, hoping it would be a diversion. They laid themselves in the middle of the road, as you can see. Some arrests have quickly been made as people have been dragged to the side. The remaining few have glued themselves to the road, but that doesn't take away the anger that is felt by all of these drivers that are trapped on this bridge which cuts across the M25 motorway, one of the busiest motorways in the country, which connects to, and I don't know whether you can see it, the Dartford crossing. This is the main connection, for those not aware, between Essex and Kent on the east side of London. At the moment, traffic is jamming a little bit at the end, but that's nothing out of the ordinary. It seems to be on this specific junction that disruption has been caused. Now, the Insulate Britain protesters here, their message has been well broadcast. They want all homes in the UK to be insulated by 2030. They say their issue is with the government as they call for action and not members of the public. Well, the members of the public trapped on this stretch of a junction will probably feel that they're pretty affected as well.
Thank you for that update, James. James Waterhouse at the Dartford crossing. Let's catch up with all the weather news now, shall we? Carol Kirkwood is at the Weather Centre. Morning to you, Carol.
Good morning, Rebecca, and good morning to you too. It's a pretty wet morning for some of us this morning, especially across northern England, also North Wales, parts of Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. And if anything, the weather front producing this rain will move a little bit further north through the day. Now, ahead of it, there's a fair bit of sunshine, variable amounts of cloud and some showers across western Scotland. To the south of it, still a lot of cloud, but we'll see some breaks in the shelter in the east as we go through the day. But gusty winds through the Irish Sea and areas adjacent to it locally. We're looking at gales. Temperatures today 12 to about 18 degrees. The average at this time of year is roughly 10 to 14 north to south. Now through this evening and overnight we have the rain ensconced in more or less the same place. If anything though, getting into a bit more of Wales and southwest England. Again, on either side of it, variable amounts of cloud. It's not going to be a cold night. Still gusty winds across the Irish Sea. Into tomorrow then, we still have this rain. Some sunshine on both sides of it, brighter in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and still mild.
Hello, this is BBC News with me, Rebecca Jones. The headlines. Chancellor Rishi Sunak is limbering up to deliver his budget speech to the House of Commons. Measures announced so far include a rise in the national living wage and an end to the public sector pay freeze. But the government is under pressure to do more to help with the rising costs of living. A report by MPs says the government's coronavirus test and trace programme in England failed its main objective of breaking chains of transmission, despite costing an eye-watering amount of money. And the Queen withdraws on medical advice from hosting a reception at the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow. Sport now. There's been a lot going on the pitch and off, actually, Holly. Good to see you.
Hi Rebecca, good to see you too, and good morning at home. Now we're hearing news today that a group of former rugby league players are taking legal action against the RFL, claiming that they've been left with brain damage and are suing for alleged negligence. Now it's alleged the RFL failed in its duty of care to protect the players from the risks associated with concussions and subconcussions. Lawyers for the former players, which includes Great Britain star Bobby Golding, say there is a ticking time bomb of potentially hundreds of former players who are developing various neurological issues. Earlier, I spoke to former Wales prop Mickey Edwards, who was diagnosed with early onset dementia earlier this month.
It started for years and years, just recently after playing the game, wandering around like a lost soul because you're suffering in silence because you're not really one. We're not really guys to talk about our feelings. It's not deemed as right. But we had headaches, bright lights, confusion, being clumsy, and that's never me. So I just basically wanted to get tests done to see what was up with me.
Well, it was a great night for 2 out of the 3 home nations in their Women's World Cup qualifiers, with wins for England and Wales. Northern Ireland, though, came agonisingly close to beating an Austrian side who are ranked 27 places above them, while it was England who were the giants in Latvia, and the Lionesses showed no mercy. Joe Curry reports.
Stepping out in chilly Latvia, England cruising through qualifying looking for another big win. And they only had to wait 7 minutes to find their opener. Ella Toone, with time and space on the edge of the box, had no problem slamming it home. And minutes later, she was at it again, with almost a carbon copy of her first. Good work from Fran Kirby on her 50th cap, set Toone up to score again, with White and Bright adding 2 more before the break. England made 4 changes at the start of the second half, but there was no change of pace. Beth Mead continuing her good form with this individual effort to net England's 5th, before Toone notched up her hat-trick, picking herself up and going it alone to make it a very special night on only her 6th appearance. And the goals kept coming, with Rachel Daly eventually wrapping up proceedings and a 10-0 win to make it 4 wins from 4, and a very happy birthday for manager Serena Wiegman. Elsewhere in Group D, Northern Ireland came within seconds of a famous win. After going behind in the first half, they hit back twice after the break, with Demi Vance scoring a stunning free kick to give them the lead. They couldn't cling on to it though, and they conceded in injury time to settle for a draw. Many of Northern Ireland's squad, however, are semi-professional, and this point could go a long way in their bid to qualify for the World Cup. Meanwhile, Wales claimed a comfortable 4-0 victory at home to Estonia in Cardiff, in front of a record crowd. The pick of the goals came from Helen Ward, who got on the end of a brilliantly weighted pass. Wales now have 10 points in their opening 4 games. Joe Curry, BBC News.
Well, it was a great night for Arsenal. They are through to the last 8 of the League Cup. They beat Leeds 2-0 at the Emirates Stadium. Callum Chambers scoring the first. Then a mistake in the Leeds defence allowed former Leeds loanee Eddie Nketiah to get Arsenal second and secure their place in the next round. And Chelsea are also through to the quarter-finals after beating Southampton on penalties at Stamford Bridge. That game finished 1-1. Reece James scoring the decisive spot kick for Chelsea there. Elsewhere, Sunderland beat QPR, also on penalties. And Emma Raducanu has won her first match since her stunning US Open triumph and her first ever WTA match at the Transylvania Open in Romania. She came from a set down to beat Polona Hercog to move into the second round. And this was her first time competing in her father's homeland. There were, of course, no fans present, but her 88-year-old grandmother, Nicolina, was there to watch her win. Great result for her. And that is all your sport for now. Rebecca.
Holly, thanks for that. Let's get more now on the Chancellor's budget speech, which you can watch live here on BBC News at just gone midday. Mike Cherry is chair of the Federation of Small Businesses. Mike, I think we've sorted out the technical issues and hopefully we can see and hear you perfectly now. And so I want to start by asking you, what do you want to hear from the Chancellor today?
Well, there are a couple of very early wins that small businesses have been asking for ever since the Chancellor announced his increase in the national insurance contributions, which pushed that to over 15% for employers. And that is a very simple increase in the employment allowance that employers get relief against that national insurance on from £4,000 to £5,000, which would help the very smallest businesses maintain the jobs that they are struggling to keep at the moment. So that would be a simple one. The second one, of course, is with regards to business rates. And let me remind all of your viewers that business rates is not just retail on the high street. It affects all the supply chain behind retail, hospitality, leisure, and indeed into manufacturers. And this is a regressive anti-growth tax. We need to see the threshold increased again to take the very smallest businesses out of the amount that they have to pay for business rates, pending the long-awaited review that has now been kicked further down the road by the Chancellor in not coming forward with his fundamental review at this budget.
And how confident are you of getting what you want?
Well, I think there are some simple things, as I say, on the employment allowance he can do. There's also other anomalies with regards to business rates. If you are wanting to go towards net zero, for instance, and green your business by putting solar panels even on the roof to help you with your energy costs, which also are massively increased at the moment, then those solar panels also get included in the business rates assessment, which increases the bill you have to pay when you're trying to do the right thing by going green.
Businesses have of course received millions in government support during the pandemic, including the furlough payments. Do your members accept that they have a role to play in getting the economy back on track?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's not forget all of that money that was there to support businesses to get them through this pandemic, as far as now even, has been very gratefully received. It's kept the jobs going where they possibly could be kept. And it's kept businesses alive. The problem that you've got now is that so many of them aren't back to normal trading. They've taken on additional debt, whether it be through the different loan schemes that the government has been able to put in place to help support businesses, that they are finding the increase in costs, whether that be increases in energy costs, whether it be the increases in diesel for doing their own business, and supply chain issues, shortages of materials, as well as significant cost increases. All of that is impacting the businesses as much as consumers. So there has to be some relief somewhere for the smallest of businesses to help them get through what is still quite a mixed message coming through from government that gets them through the winter and through into 2022, when we can really get the economy recovering and growth underway.
And will those extra costs that your members are experiencing, that you've just outlined there, will they mean higher prices ultimately for customers?
I think, as we've seen through this pandemic, with businesses still struggling, not getting the capacity, whether it be in the local restaurants or having problems getting the key members of staff that they need to employ, then that is going to be an ongoing problem. They can't absorb these sort of cost increases. We're not talking about 2 or 3%. We're talking about much, much larger increases. And at some point, that is not going to be sustainable unless it is passed on.
Mike Cherry, Chair of the Federation of Small Businesses. Really good to have your thoughts and insights. Thanks for joining us. Well, a number of policies have already been announced, including an extra £5.9 billion funding for NHS England. We're joined now by Saffron Cordery, Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Providers. And a very good morning to you. As I say, the government has already announced this £5.9 billion to the NHS to tackle, among other things, waiting lists. The government says it's a game-changing amount of money. I'm assuming you agree?
It's great to have that investment in tackling the waiting lists. What we have to remember, though, is that what we are dealing with here is both demand that has built up during COVID, but also we have an NHS that was looking pretty fragile before COVID came in. So alongside investing in things like diagnostic testing and cutting waiting lists with surgical hubs, which is fantastic investment, we also need to see investment in the overall NHS estate, so the buildings and facilities, because there's a £9.7 billion backlog there. So we need to be able to fix things like leaking roofs, broken boilers, really transform mental health wards, for example. So there's a lot of wider investment on the estates that we see across the NHS. And what we also need is a much longer term perspective on investing in the workforce. So that's a really critical issue.
So just to be clear, are you asking for another 9.7 billion on top of the 5.9 billion you've already been promised, or is it actually more than that?
I think what we're saying is the government needs to look at that backlog maintenance that we know is at such a high level, and make sure that it puts on the table some money to tackle that as well, because that's been rising year on year before COVID and during COVID. But as I said, the really important thing here is to think about the buildings, to think about investing in the services, but also to think about investing in the workforce, because that's absolutely critical. Without staff, without the supply of staff, without well-trained staff, we cannot deliver the services, and that's absolutely critical.
Do you think you're going to get all of this, though? Because there just isn't the money, is there?
We know that the public purse is incredibly challenged. We know that services like local government, which provides social care and public health, also need to see investment. But what we're looking at here is the costs of COVID, which are high, and they make the running costs of public services even higher. But we're also looking at where the investment didn't take place for COVID. So, yes, we know what we are talking about here is large sums of money, but what we're also talking about is investing in services for the future, and we have to remember that.
Saffron Cordery from NHS Providers, really good to have you with us. Many thanks. And as I said a little earlier, we'll be bringing you the budget speech in a special programme later this morning here on BBC News. We'll have pre-budget analysis and all the reaction, and that's live from 11:15 this morning. Let's update you now with the headlines on BBC News. And the Chancellor is preparing to deliver his budget statement to the House of Commons. As I said, we'll have full coverage. A report by MP says the coronavirus test and trace programme in England failed to break chains of transmission and cost an eye-watering amount of money. The Queen withdraws on medical advice from hosting a reception at the Climate Summit in Glasgow. Water companies will face new rules to reduce the amount of sewage dumped into waterways during wet weather, following a partial government U-turn. Ministers say the new measures will force industries to make a progressive reduction in the sewage dumped in rivers. Well, it follows pressure from the House of Lords and campaign groups after MPs originally rejected the proposal.
In light of the amendment that was debated last week, what we're now saying is we will also write that onto a statutory footing so that there'll be a statutory requirement on water companies to create those progressive declines in the use of storm overflows. We've listened to the debate that took place in Parliament, so we will write what is already government policy into the statutes to give people that reassurance they seek.
A man is believed to have died after falling from a boat off the Essex coast while attempting to cross the Channel. Two other men, both of whom are Somali nationals, were rescued on Monday near the port of Harwich. The Home Office said the incident was a reminder of the extreme dangers of crossing the Channel in small boats. A teenager has been charged with the murder of two boys after an incident in Essex in the early hours of Sunday morning. 19-year-old Frankie Watson will appear before Southend Magistrates Court charged with 2 counts of murder, attempted murder and possession of an offensive weapon. 2 other men connected to the incident have been released on bail. The US prosecutor investigating the accidental fatal shooting on the set of the film Rust in New Mexico says the weapon fired by Alec Baldwin was a real gun and not a prop. Criminal charges have not been ruled out. It's also emerged that the assistant director of the production had been previously sacked over gun safety violations. According to a production company, Dave Halls was dismissed from a set in 2019 when a firearm unexpectedly went off. Helena Hutchins died last Thursday after being accidentally shot by the actor Alec Baldwin. Public health experts in the United States have recommended children aged 5 to 11 should get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The decision will affect around 28 million children and is likely to come into place within a matter of weeks. It now awaits further approval from the Food and Drug Administration and the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention. The Queen will not attend next week's climate change summit in Glasgow following medical advice to rest. The announcement comes a week after the 95-year-old monarch spent a night in hospital for preliminary medical checks. Buckingham Palace says she'll address the delegates in a pre-recorded video message instead. James Reynolds has this report.
On Tuesday last week, the Queen hosted a reception for business leaders at Windsor. The next morning, her trip to Northern Ireland was cancelled and she stayed overnight in hospital. Yesterday, she gently resumed her public schedule, a video audience with the new Korean ambassador. This was then followed by a palace statement. Her Majesty has regretfully decided that she will no longer travel to Glasgow to attend the evening reception of COP26. Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception, but will deliver an address to the assembled delegates via a recorded video message.
I'm quite sure what she's got at the back of her mind is that she wants to be absolutely fine and fighting fit on November the 14th, which is Remembrance Sunday. That is the most sacred day in her calendar. But I think to go to Glasgow to stand in a room full of coughing, wheezing delegates from all over the world is probably an engagement too far.
Preparations for the climate change conference have been of keen interest to the Queen. We still don't know who's coming, she was overheard saying when opening the Welsh Senedd 2 weeks ago. We now know it won't be her. And so the Queen will now rely further on that useful pandemic tool, the video message or call. She won't get to meet the Glasgow delegates, but they will still get to hear from her. James Reynolds, BBC News.
Now, he's been praised for his tireless fundraising efforts over more than 6 decades. And now, World War II veteran Harry Billinge has finally had the chance to see one of his biggest dreams become a reality. The 96-year-old has travelled to Normandy to visit a special memorial honouring soldiers, sailors and airmen who died under British command following the D-Day landings, a project his efforts helped to fund. John Maguire joined him.
As a former soldier, Harry Billinge would have done this thousands of times. But never was a salute more poignant and heartfelt.
Oh, what a waste of life. Marvellous men. Marvellous men. This is marvellous memorial. I never thought I'd be here really, but it's wonderful. And I feel very humble today, and I'm deeply moved because I didn't realise what a wonderful place it is now. Well, beyond all comprehension. Marvellous.
He was just a teenager when he was one of the first to land here in Normandy on what the Allies called Gold Beach. He wanted to come to the British Memorial for the very first time and to see the names of some of the men who died on D-Day and during the battles that followed.
That's him. Alexander Banks.
And up there, look. Let go.
Banks.
Banks. J. Banks.
Yes.
Can you see him?
Yes.
There you go.
Chiselled into the memorial's stone are the names of 22,442 people who were killed here during the summer of 1944.
Marvellous man. He got promoted to Lance Corporal. He was a sapper. Right. But he was an elderly bloke to be over here, really. I think he was old enough to be my dad.
Harry's fundraising has been tireless, a regular fixture at Parr Market near his home in Cornwall. He's raised almost £40,000. And that dedication is recognised here on one of the walls. But typically, Harry's reaction to seeing his name was to think of others.
Don't deserve that. I don't. We did it with all these wonderful men. Thank you very much. Can't believe it. I didn't expect my name to be here.
The COVID pandemic had prevented D-Day veterans from being at the official opening back in June. Harry was joined then by family and friends to watch the ceremony via a video link. But today he was able to see and to touch what he'd dreamed of for so many years, And he was able to see another special tribute to his endeavours, Harry's bench.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. Give me a kiss. And when you laid in a hole in the ground, being shelled and machine gun at and rifle fire, when you're in a hole with a bloke, you get to know him. You get to know his very soul. I think it's a wonderful monument to all those wonderful men who gave up their lives for a very small amount of money. They did it in the form of duty.
At the site's centre, a sculpture depicts 3 men fighting their way up the beach. It captures their determination, their aggression and their youth.
Bear with me. I'm breaking my heart standing here nearly. I love you all. If you could hear me. Just tanks and guns, weapons of murder. We did it though, didn't we? We knocked them back.
Harry is well known in the towns that line this coast. The people here are eternally grateful to their liberators.
For the local, it is something very important, and we live with it. And we had, well, it had to go on and living, but never forget, never forget. It's so important to remember that they came here, that they managed to pass so many obstacles to get freedom for us, first of all, but then for Europe and for the world. And it's just amazing, all those young guys. I mean, yeah, it's important.
And there's no rest for the committed. He's planning to spend this afternoon collecting in the nearby town of Arromanches, continuing to raise money for the memorial's upkeep and a planned education centre, something Harry is passionate about. A man who has already done so much believes there is yet more to do to ensure his friends and colleagues who never made it home are always remembered.
And may God bless you all, and may God bless me too, and to give me strength to carry on a little while longer.
That report from John Maguire. Let's catch up with all the weather news now, shall we? Here's Carol again. Hi there.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Today we are looking at rather unsettled conditions for some of us. There's heavy rain, not just today, but actually for the next few days. But for all of us, it's very mild for the time of year. Now, this is the weather front causing all this rain. It's moving northwards and at times moving southwards. And you can see from the isobars, once again today, it's going to be breezy. But the rain really is the main story. We've had heavy rain this morning across parts of northwest England into Wales. And we've had some heavy showers across Scotland with some showers and some drizzle across parts of England and also Wales. Now, as we go through the next few days, the heaviest rain is likely to be across southern Scotland, northwest England and also West Wales. And there is a high possibility that we will see some flooding. The rainfall totals are already starting to mount up, and you can see how the rain today stays in more or less the same areas, but if anything spreads a bit further north into central and southern Scotland. To the north of that, a few showers in the northwest, but some bright skies in the shelter of the Grampians with a little bit of sunshine. Some of that rain getting into the east of Northern Ireland, showers in the north, and then you can see how the rain continues across northwest England in particular and northwest Wales. For the rest of England and Wales, quite a lot of cloud, but again, if you're in the shelter, especially in the east, you're likely to see some sunny intervals. The other feature is the wind today, especially in areas around the Irish Sea coastline. Gusty winds, gusting to gale force for some. Now, these are our temperatures, 11 to about 18 degrees, so above average for the time of year, which is roughly 10 to 14 north to south. Now, through this evening and overnight, we still have our weather front draped across northern England, southern Scotland, but extending into a wee bit more of Wales and the Isles of Scilly and also eastern Scotland. On either side of that, it will be mostly dry. Once again, it's not going to be a cold night and it will still be windy in areas next to the Irish Sea. So tomorrow, here is our weather front. If anything, it will drift a little bit farther eastwards. Now ahead of it, still a lot of dry weather. We'll see some sunny intervals develop. And on the other side of that weather front, for Scotland and for Northern Ireland, it's going to be a brighter day than today. There'll still be some cloud around, but we'll see a wee bit more sunshine. Temperatures, 12 in the north to about 17 as we push down to the south. The rain continues on Friday. Temperatures, though, as we head through the weekend, will slowly start to come down.